anything. Designer pizzas, whatever there is. But we really know what we're talking about when we say design. Now, with that said, if we analyze the word style, something I was very fascinated by, I went off to do graduate studies in Italy, and I found it really interesting that fashion designers in Italy were called stiliste, which meant stylist. So if they're stylists, why are they called stylists? Well, because the industry, and even more so the education and the pedagogy, is teaching people to look always in the past for inspiration. Because in fashion, most of the time, it's not really about performance or about function. It's almost, in a sense, you could argue, costume. So if you go into the past, you can get all kinds of inspired and say, oh, I'm really was inspired from the 1920s, and I mixed it with, this Nigerian culture, and this is my mix, and this is what I got. And this is fashion. So with that said, so here's a shoe. That last shoe was a shoe that is for a Brazilian company that sells, and this company is amazing. They sell PVC, 100% recycled PVC plastic shoes, and they sell 100 million shoes a year in Brazil. And there's 180 million people in Brazil, which means almost everybody's buying half of one shoe a year. Amazing. So they came to me and they asked me to do a high heel shoe, and they made a shoe. You might have seen the latest shoe. They did a shoe with Zaha Hadid. They did a shoe with the Campana brothers and a few other designers. And so when I was doing my high heel shoe, the first thing I thought about was two things. Number one is, I'm not going to buy into this notion of fashion, that I'm going to reiterate the past. Because even the word high heel, you could argue, the question is why? Why do women wear high heels? Why? I think so that men, we can keep them subordinate. I think nobody got my joke. Anyway. So with that said, there must be a reason why the market is constantly pushing this notion of high heel, high heel, high heel. But with that said, my wife always loves wearing high heels and complains that no one's ever made a comfortable high heel shoe. And it's kind of shocking, actually. Why? It's absurd in a way. I think we live in a day and age in 2010 where everything is, in a sense, solved. Every problem is solved. We've solved the most comfortable chair that exists. We solved everything. Now we're just making variation on variation on variation. So if we're making variation, the question is, well, why don't we resolve this issue of that we have this ubiquitous thing called a high heel and do something about it? So I was very inspired by the Nike, and this was in 2004, the Nike Bounce. I thought, could I make a high heel that bounced? So I decided inside the heel that there's a spring inside, molded plastic polymer with air holes in it that move. And then I inject this is a triple injection. Bottom is a very hard sole of Zytel, which means that it would never wear down, unlike leather or anything, because we use a lot of materials that really don't have the performances that they should today. And the third was to put the PVC over the whole thing so that actually the part that touches your foot is very soft too. And that high heel, when it was released, and it was like all the girls in my office were wearing them, and everybody was going on about how they're the most comfortable high heel they ever wore. And I was thrilled because that was my goal. I was determined. So what I was trying to do in the fashion industry was not style, but to try to kind of do something new, but something new not for the sake of new, but new to evolve us. So styling is really this notion of going into the past. And I always think about how when we analyze the past, every movement that took place, we end up using the adjective style. For example, we say, modernist style, the brutalist style, fauve style, expressionist style, abstract expressionist style, right? The pop art style. Why? Because it seems like the minute a movement ends, it's called a style. And it's like we open up some this vault of history, we put it in there and say, okay, it's done, and we refer to it as a style. And modernism is a style. Even minimalism at this point is style. Because in fact, we're not philosophically living in a kind of notion of modernism anymore. We're just replicating the style of modernism. So it's not even really about an experience or another higher agenda. It's more just form. So, design is not style. So, with that said, even more so, as you move on, you think, well, okay, So let's look at the interior world, the domestic world, the things that we live with, and let's look at why we don't seem to change archetypes. And what I mean by that is, and I'll give you many, many examples. When I get on an aeroplane, the seat on the aeroplane, as far as I'm concerned, is an archetype. And that archetype has not changed. So in turn, I always think about this. Here I am at work, sitting 8-9 hours on a Herman Miller Aran chair. I get up, I never ever walk home thinking that I'm uncomfortable or my back hurts or anything. I get on an airplane, in 20 minutes I feel uncomfortable. So what is that? You could argue design is also very, very psychological, because there's other things that are making you feel uncomfortable. It's the noise, it's the acoustics inside the plane, it's the kind of foreboding doors above your head, it's the lighting, it's all those sorts of things. But also, the chair is really uncomfortable. So I was about 12 years ago, I was out at Boeing, and I was giving them a lecture. People worked at Boeing, talking about design. And I said this to them. I said, you know what? Why don't Boeing make a relationship with Herman Miller? And Herman Miller makes the chair for Boeing. And you imagine if you make the chair out of a polymer, Zytel plastic, with a mesh like the chair is, it'd be amazing, because you would walk on the airplane and you could practically see through the whole plane. Because usually the chairs actually are the things that kind of make the spaces feel more kind of claustrophobic and et cetera. Let alone, you know, the thing that kills you in an airplane crash is the chair. It crushes you. So when you do this, they're just telling you, they tell you to do that position so that they save your teeth. It's true. So you saw an office chair just now. I did a chair just now. It's just new. It just came out, and it's called Chakras, and it's basically touches all your chakra points. So because I'm kind of fascinated with this notion of kind of trying to make change and trying to kind of improve, let's say, the condition, and not just functionally, on every level. Because I think design is now way beyond this argument of function and form. Frankly, I don't know why it was ever an argument. You can't have a form without function and function without form if you're talking design. Those are inseparable. But we've gone way beyond that. We have a thing that I would refer to as human desires. And what are human desires? Human desires, for example, right now are to have a mobile phone in your hand. You could argue it's not a need anymore, it's become a desire. But the desire in turn is becoming a need. So really you could argue then that design is about other things. It's about touching us emotionally. It's about touching us physiologically. It's about really touching us spiritually. But with all that said, all the other factors have to be in place. Things should work seamlessly. And when things work seamlessly, then you don't even really have to think about it. And you could think about a kind of higher level of how you could live in a better space, or enjoy a better sofa, or have a better kitchen that's more fluid, that just works. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about this notion of fluidity, because for many, many years people say, oh, Karim, the blob, I'm a blobject guy, I'm da-da-da. I used the word blobject by accident. 20 years ago, I was typing in on my Mac 2CI the word blob and the word object, and I didn't put a space. So I ended up with this word blobject. And the word blob, I went, wow, that's a nice word. Why is it a nice word? Because for me, I had to make a definition very, very quickly. And the definition was, it's an object that doesn't have a straight line. Now, interestingly enough, in nature, a straight line does not exist. And even us as human beings, it's fascinating, we're completely asymmetrical. So you could almost argue symmetry doesn't exist in nature either. But look at the world we created. We created the most Cartesian world. We created such a Cartesian world that we've now designed everything to fit within that world. So what have we done? We build architecture. Next thing you know, we build counters and kitchens that have to fit in it. Next thing you know, the refrigerator has to fit in that. And it goes on and on. Next thing you know, the carton of milk has to fit in the refrigerator. And next thing you know, we built a world that is not human, that has nothing to do with us. That we are actually used to holding a rectangle carton of milk. And what do? We stay, and we stay and stay with all these artifacts and the way we've shaped this world around us, because very, very few people, very few companies are critically making change.